know, as we've all have watched National Guard troops become militarized, moving into Washington, D.C., and the local residents in D.C. resist. It's been quite inspiring. And so as those new troops are lining up in places like Chicago, Savannah, perhaps Baltimore, New York, Oakland, clearly the Trump administration has a plan to roll out many more cities' occupation with these federalized, militarized National Guard troops. The question becomes, what forms of resistance can we take? Should we take? Legally are available to us. Sean Charles Dunn threw a sandwich at some of those troops in DC in August, I think it was August 10th, just a little bit ago. But he was arrested and charged with a felony for assaulting a federal officer with a sandwich. What's interesting, and what I want to talk about today, is the degree to which the grand jury that was convened to decide whether to indict him on that sandwich throwing event as a felony chose not to indict him. They felt that the evidence, the charges, whatever, were insufficient to charge him, to move the case along, the prosecution along, as a felony prosecution. So the prosecutors then stepped back, the federal prosecutors did, and charged him with a misdemeanor, which is a much less, certainly less punitive charge than a felony. I raise this because this is something we can do across the country. All of us at times are called upon to be jurors or grand jurors in criminal cases. I myself served a couple of years ago as a grand juror in Manhattan. So 2-3 weeks, every day we had to go and sit in a room and wait for the prosecutors to come in and bring a case to us about whether the person should be indicted. It was a lot of packages being stolen out of lobbies of buildings in New York. There were some assaults. There was one guy that kept stealing alcohol from bars in Greek restaurants. And there were many cases where we as grand jurors discussed whether it made sense, whether it was right to indict these individuals. Case after case after case, the prosecution did not actually show that the person charged was the one who had actually done the thing that they were being accused of. And this is something we can do in these political cases where people in our communities who are resisting the militarized, federalized National Guard's occupation of our cities, the flooding of ICE agents in our cities. When people get charged with crimes in resisting those officers, that militarized presence in our cities, we can decide to engage in what's called jury nullification. This is a term that scholar Professor Paul Butler has written about quite a bit. I usually teach it in my classes, or taught it in my classes at Columbia, that it can be a form of collective and legal resistance for citizens who are serving on juries, grand juries in particular, to decide that they will not indict in these political cases, that they feel that the charges are illegitimate, that perhaps the resistance that formed the basis for the criminal prosecution was one for which the person should not be held criminally liable. And there's a role for all of us when serving as jurors and grand jurors to think hard about what role we're being asked to play in collaborating with what is an illegal militarization of our cities, preparing for we will see what. But I want to urge all of us, when you get called to serve as a grand juror, have a conversation with the other grand jurors about how they feel about what's happening in your cities. And you have an enormous amount of power to not indict when people are charged with political forms of resistance.